imposter syndrome. And ultimately, to me, I would define it as this experience, this feeling, and these thoughts that despite your whatever external successes that you've been having, despite whatever achievements that you've accomplished, that you internally feel not good enough, like you don't deserve it, like you're a fraud, that people are going to find out at some point, and everyone will know that you're a big phony. And this is something that I talk with lawyers about probably on a daily basis.
Mm.
It probably comes up in one capacity or another in almost every single group that I run, in every single assessment individual session. It's so commonly experienced.
Right.
And there really doesn't seem to be any um, groups of lawyers that don't experience it.
Our goal in creating Finding New Waters is to provide a resource for families to help navigate the complexities of supporting a loved one struggling with substance use or mental health. When we find ourselves in crisis due to one of these issues, most people have no idea where to turn. We hope to shed some light onto what is often the darkest hour for many families. Nikki Ellington has been the Eastern Clinical Coordinator with the Lawyer Assistance Program since 2014. She is dually licensed mental health and addictions therapist and has been practicing in the mental health field for the past 17 years. Ms. Ellington worked in a wide variety of outpatient settings with particular experience treating professionals and Special Forces services members through her employment with the United States Army. Ms. Ellington provides a confidential mental health service to any judge, lawyer, or law student in the eastern half of the state, which encompasses High Point to the Outer Banks. Nikki Ellington, thank you for joining us here on Finding New Waters. It's so
Thanks
great
for
to have you here.
having me. Yeah.
All right, great. So I think it's always helpful for our listeners to know more about you. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background and what kind of work you're doing with the LAP?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned, I've been in the mental health field for the last 17 years and have had a lot of really good experiences, mostly in outpatient treatment. Been able to do a lot of addictions work throughout my career, mental health as well.
Mhm.
And at the Lawyer's Assistance Program, I've been here for 8 years. And we provide free and confidential, I'll say it twice, confidential
Uh-huh.
mental health support to any lawyer in the state. And my job is awesome. I love my job. I love working with the attorneys and the professionals. And I feel really grateful to be able to provide a safe space for lawyers to get the help that they need.
Mhm. That's awesome.
So what does that look like? Can you tell us a little bit? Like, if a lawyer is struggling, like how does that process work?
Yeah, so most of the attorneys that I work with are self-referred. So they've heard about us. Our program's actually been around since the 70s and it started originally out of Alcoholics Anonymous with
Mm,
one 12-stepping one lawyer 12-stepping another
mm,
when in need, and then over the years it's morphed into this much larger entity. We have licensed staff now and we are able to provide services really for all types of mental health issues. So most of the time now, the attorneys have just heard about us, seen us at different continuing education programs, seen us at the law schools, and are able to come in and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with something. I would like a little extra help." So that is the majority of the folks that I see.
that's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I got to tell you, I had the honor to speak at the LAP conference in the fall in Asheville, and frankly, I was terrified going into that experience. I was thinking I'm going to be standing up talking about new material in front of a group of lawyers, and as a doctor, I've been trained to fear lawyers intensely. Okay, and could not have been more wrong. The group there was so friendly, so energetic, like so down to earth. And we just had a great time together. I loved it. And I was shocked at how inviting and fun the people in the room were. Um, which to me is so like the opposite of what I would expect. Being a professional, thinking, you know, if I have a substance use disorder, the medical board is going to make my life very challenging. I would be terrified of referring myself to the board. And but here I'm looking at you and you seem so friendly and open and inviting, and I just feel so confused. Right. So like how do you talk to people about the process of making contact with LAP? Because it for me, I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I do have to convince people and tell them many times that we are confidential, which is cool. I'm glad to do that.
Mm.
But we truly, truly are. We are not the secret police waiting for you in the wings, trying to get you. Although our program is funded through the state bar, we are separate and private.
Wow.
So anybody that works, and the state bar is the licensing body for attorneys.
Right.
So any attorney that works with me, their name, anything that we talk about, it's all completely private and confidential, does not get reported back to the state bar at all. So, and even, there are rare exceptions where we may have a lawyer that is involved with some sort of disciplinary action. And even in those cases, I don't even like to use the word mandated because ultimately they still have to agree. They still have to agree to work with us and agree to allow me to communicate back to the state bar the basics of their compliance with our program. But
Okay.
that's very few and far between. On average, I would say I probably see 2 to 3 new lawyers each week. And out of all those attorneys, I probably, like right now, I probably only have 4 that are dealing with some sort of disciplinary
Oh,
action
wow.
that's directly related to their mental health.
Mhm.
So it's, majority are self-referred. And I think my observation as an outsider looking in has been the LAP has done a good job over the years of trying to really reinstate that we are confidential and reinforce that for the attorneys in the community. So hopefully they can trust us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a huge resource
Yeah, it is.
to
Yeah.
have elite mental health professionals there for you to support your profession and your career, and it's confidential.
Yep.
That's a huge blessing.
Yeah. Well, and the other benefit, like you got to see our conference, and a lot of almost all of the attorneys there are folks that had been working with us for a long period of time, anywhere 2+ years. So we also have this wonderful network of lawyers who are trying to lead healthy lives,
It's awesome.
which
Yeah.
is so
Yeah.
cool
Yeah.
that we can provide that safe space for another attorney to raise their hand and say, I could use a little extra help. And we're able to provide that hope that you can get some extra help and your life can get better. And doesn't mean that life's always going to be perfect, but we've got a support system to help you through it and a group of your peers to show you that it's safe and that it's okay to not have to act like you have your stuff together all the time.
Yeah.
So Nikki, I know one thing that's been one thing that you've wanted to talk about today is the imposter syndrome. I know you've been kind of passionate about that. There's been some talking that you've done recently about that. So maybe share a little bit with us about what's on your mind.
Yeah, this has been something that I feel like lawyers and professionals generally have dealt with, maybe forever, for a really long time. But then now that more people are talking about it, we've got this nice catchy name for it
Right.
now. Imposter syndrome. And ultimately, to me, I would define it as this experience, this feeling, and these thoughts that despite your whatever external successes that you've been having, despite whatever achievements that you've accomplished, that you internally feel not good enough, like you don't deserve it, like you're a fraud, that people are going to find out at some point, and everyone will know that you're a big phony. And this is something that I talk with lawyers about probably on a daily basis. It probably comes up in one capacity or another in almost every single group that I run, in every single assessment individual session. It's so commonly experienced.
Right.
And there really doesn't seem to be any groups of lawyers that don't experience it
Really?
at some point. I mean, I wouldn't say that everyone does,
Right.
but even the people that on the outside look the most successful, the super lawyers, like even them are having these same feelings of insecurity and anxiety about their performance and their worth. So it can be really paralyzing.
Mm.
So I think at LAP, this has come up so frequently also because they're able to say, I'm having these feelings, and everyone else in the room is just nodding their head like, yep,
Hmm.
me too. I get it. Like, we've all been there. We get it. And we're able to kind of share how can we deal with that and bounce ideas off one another about what's worked for them.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
When I saw your interest in imposter syndrome, I was actually surprised because I was thinking, imposter syndrome is something I hear more about like on Instagram, like TikTok, like just kind of popular media platforms, and usually talking to people who are like college, young adult, like early career. And so the idea that imposter syndrome comes up a lot in your work, working with lawyers who are early in their recovery. I was like, what's the connection
Mhm.
between alcohol, substances, process addiction, and imposter syndrome?
I don't know that the connection is with addiction. Honestly,
Okay.
across the board, I see this with individuals that are dealing with depression, anxiety, trauma, substance use. I mean,
Sure.
really anything under the sun, and then stress. Um, I've thought a lot about it, and I feel like for attorneys and professionals in general, they are dealing with a different kind of stress. And although I feel like a lot of jobs are stressful, there's a particular personality, and not all lawyers are the same,
Sure.
but there's been enough patterns of personalities that I've observed that I think is drawn to the law.
Hmm.
So perfectionism, being an overachiever, being a type A person, a lot of lawyers tend to fall in that category. When they enter law school, they're kind of mixed with all the other folks that are
Right.
in that same category. And I went to school to be a therapist, which is a totally different experience than going to law school.
Right.
We're all about the feelings, and they're like, no feelings, just logic. But in law school, the way that the teaching style there, I think also doesn't set them up for a lot of success with the competition. Dealing with competition. It can feel for a lot of people very competitive. It can feel very shaming if you don't know the answers, if you don't get things right. Now, I think my observation has been that I think law schools are trying to shift away from that model.
Okay.
And I've got hope around that, but it's been a long time that they've been functioning in that framework. So it takes a long time for change to happen.
Absolutely.
So I think we kind of combine those two together, and it's this recipe for disaster when they enter the practice of law, of just this, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, and I've heard a lot of lawyers say that in law school, they teach you how to think like a lawyer. They don't teach you how to be a lawyer. So
Interesting.
then they enter this world where it's a whole new experience. And for a lot of folks that are overachievers and are perfectionists, they've not really had the experience of failing. They've not really had that happen. So when they enter law and they're like, I don't know how to do calendar call. I don't know how to write this brief or whatever. I'm not good with the examples all the time.
Sure.
But the law examples. But, that can really throw them. It can really throw them for a loop. And that sense of insecurity seems to persist.
Yeah.
It can be addressed and dealt with. I don't know that I've seen it ever fully go away completely, but it becomes way more manageable with treatment, with talking about it, with practicing alternative coping mechanisms for dealing with it. So hopefully that describes it a little bit.
And my hunch about it was imposter syndrome, me being a recovering person from imposter syndrome, it is so painful to live with it, right? It's work is stressful enough, and managing imposter syndrome on top of work just makes things unmanageable.
Yep.
It's so stressful. And I know that where there's pain, there's self-medication, right? And so the imposter syndrome, like a stressful day of feeling like you don't belong at work, you don't belong in your practice, you don't belong with your partners, great time to go and have a drink.
Yep. That is for sure.
Yeah.
That is for sure. And it's this like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like feel like a fraud, so I certainly can't let anybody know I'm a fraud. So I have to like overachieve and
Right.
overcompensate
Mm-hmm.
and work extra so everyone knows that I'm here and I'm doing a good job. And do all this adding more and more and more and more to the plate. But then having that relief, substances are the perfect way
Right.
way
Yeah.
Right.
It's fast. It's
to
predictable. Right. It's on
exactly
demand.
exactly
Mm.
and it's going to give me that kind of numb out
Mhm.
avoidant relaxed state
Right.
that
Yeah.
a lot of people are looking for, that the escapism for sure.
But the irony is, when you are so encumbered by alcohol, then you really don't belong
Yes.
in the practice. Like, you really don't belong with holding the responsibility of a huge legal question,
Mm.
right?
Yes. Yes. I think it takes them a long time. A lot of lawyers, it takes them a long time to get to that point where they are able to recognize that.
Mm.
I think the denial system is, I mean, it's strong for most addicts and alcoholics,
Yeah.
of course,
Mhm.
but the rationalizations for lawyers, my observation has been really embedded in not just their personality, but also the culture of
Mm.
practicing law.
Hmm.
Alcohol use in particular is very integrated into the practice where, you're taking clients out. And I think it's often shown as a way to deal with stress. Like,
Mm.
oh, I've had a hard day, I'm going to go get a drink. That's
Right.
so we're kind of like laying that in cement when we're newly in the field, that this is how we deal with stress, or it's a way a lot of people deal with stress. And that then how do you know if you're going to be the person that can leave it there and have the one drink, or if over time you're not able to do that anymore?
Right.
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 So I think the other piece is that for lawyers and alcohol use in particular, it's this big secret because they don't want others to know like how bad it is. And they're able to rationalize like, well, I only drink after 5. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I only drink when I get all my obligations done,
Right.
and then I'll drink, or I still pay all my bills. So like that should be fine. I go to all my kids' sports games. That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't drink in the morning. I'm not like that.
Right.
Right.
So it's this concept too of like, I'm not like that. I'm not that bad.
Right.
I don't need to do all that,
Right.
And that's not how it looks for most lawyers. Most lawyers do not end up being the guy under a bridge.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, when I see the real serious external negative consequences from substance use,
Mm-hmm.
they're usually so far down the rabbit hole of addiction that their whole life is a complete mess. So I think we're doing better about being able to address that sooner so that we're
Wow.
not on fire when we're
Right.
going to get
Wow.
help. But it's hard. It's hard to be able to challenge that denial system.
Yeah. I'm always super interested in what makes someone change. Like, what brings that person to the point of saying, today is the day I'm going to call LAP.
Mm.
Like, whereas like maybe the last 300, 700 days of their life was the day that they could have called LAP. So why is it on day like 800 of the opportunity that today is the day?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like in your experience, like what are the things going on in like the days and weeks leading up to that moment that people self-refer?
Yep. And that's almost always the first question I ask people is like, what's been going on in your life most recently that made you want to reach out now?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
usually it's a lot of pain and suffering. It's like
Okay.
they've reached this point where it's like, okay, I know that I cannot fix this on my own now and I need some help. But with lawyers, that's can take a long time for them to recognize that. They are in a helping profession. They are the fixers, the problem solvers. They're the people that all their clients are going to fix their lives. They're in their personal lives. Their family usually goes to them to help them with their problems. So to be able to say, not only that I cannot fix my problems for myself, because I've tried to do that and I keep ending up in the same place, if not worse. I also need to ask someone for help to do that. It takes a lot for them to get to that point. So a lot of pain and suffering. Another thing that I've seen help a lot of our volunteers, the folks that you got to meet at our conference, are so brave and willing to sacrifice their own anonymity and confidentiality to help others. So we have a great group of folks that are willing to get up and share their stories
Awesome.
to other lawyers.
Wow.
And every single time one of our lawyers does that, we get at least one phone call from someone in the audience that says, I heard this person and that's me. And I can relate to that. And you helped him or her. So I'm hopeful that you can help me too.
Wow.
That's
yeah,
great.
it's powerful.
That's powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. What about specifically with the imposter syndrome? I know you talked about maybe people don't necessarily, kind of fully get over it or whatever, but what do you feel or what have you seen like in your practice and working with the attorneys that helps them kind of shift or move through that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is being able to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times we have this inner critic that is telling us that we're not good enough. And I think in the very early stages of it, folks don't even really realize that it's not real, that it's not based in reality.
Right.
They think, no, really, I'm not good enough. Like, no, that's a fact. And when they're able to slowly let people in to see that side of them, then others are usually able to kind of question like, well, wait, didn't you tell me that you have had all these successes? You did get into law school. There's a certain bar you have to meet to get into law school. They let you in. One of my coworkers, Candace, I'll steal one of her stories. She shares about experiencing imposter syndrome we have a podcast as well.
Oh, cool.
And she told this story about how when she went to law school and she told this professor, I really don't think I'm supposed to be here. I feel like, you guys definitely probably messed up in accepting me in here. And the professor's like, okay, so you think not only that you know better than us who accepted you in the first place, but that you're so smart that you tricked us all. She's like, okay.
Right.
She tells the story way better, of course. But I mean, to me, that's like the perfect example of what that feels like. So when you're able to recognize, I think so awareness, I think is the first step.
Okay.
Being able to notice like, okay, this inner critic is happening. Can I evaluate if it's based in facts? Then being able to say, all right, I feel like I've made a mistake or I've had a failure, a bad experience. Is that based in facts? So I'll give another example of that where I had a lawyer contact me that I'd been working with for a while, and the attorney called me one day and said, I just lost my case. I'm a horrible lawyer. I should just quit. I should never do this again. I'm clearly not meant to practice law. I just need to leave. And, eventually if I keep going, I'm probably just going to get disbarred anyways. I'm like,
Wow.
okay, like let's slow down. Tell me what happened. So you lost your case. Okay. Well, it seems to me, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me there's always a winner or loser in these things. Did you make from what you can tell, did you make any major mistakes? Was there anything that happened that went terribly wrong that you did?
Right.
The attorney's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, so it seems to me like you tried your best. You did your best. We haven't noticed any major mistakes. There's a winner and a loser. You were the loser this time, and that's how it works, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's because you did something wrong.
Right.
It could be a variety of reasons that caused you to not win this case. And that doesn't mean anything about your worth or your skill as a lawyer. So being able to kind of have that awareness and then being able to evaluate the facts is, I think, the next step. Now, a lot of the times, like for this attorney, they really weren't able to evaluate the facts for themselves. So they had to like phone a friend. They phoned me. And we have a whole, all of our volunteers do that for each other where they're able to say in a group or call a friend or call one of our mentors and kind of talk through, this is what happened. This is how I feel. I feel like I've messed up. I feel like I'm not good enough. And somebody else can then reflect back, the facts, what's based in reality. And I think the more that you practice that, the easier it gets over time, the faster you're able to move through it. I think in the beginning, a lot of the times it can really stick with you. It can ruin your mood for your whole day, maybe longer, and it just lingers. And you're able to really move through it faster and kind of be able to practice letting it go. And the other thing that a lot of our lawyers have been doing that I find to be very effective is practicing mindfulness and meditation.
Okay.
So being able to, especially when like to plan ahead. So if you know you've got something really difficult on your calendar coming up or something really challenging for you, planning in your day, I'm going to take the 5 minutes after this concludes and the 5 minutes, maybe even the 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, just to practice some mindfulness, practice just sitting with my thoughts and letting the feelings wash over me and not attach them, and practice letting it go. That can be very effective.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mindfulness and meditation. I know Dr. Hong is
Absolutely.
as well. So that's always refreshing to hear that where that helps, right?
Yeah. It's so shocking to how we're as humans so easily disconnected from reality. Like, it sounds absurd, but it's so true, right? Like, we can get into our minds that all of these things are definitely going to happen, and we can get into our minds that, like, I am definitely not the right person, or I'm definitely not equipped for this task at hand. And then a minute of reconnecting intentionally with reality, it's like, oh, like I used to think all these things, but now I think these things, and this is more functional, more realistic, and I feel more confident, and this is more realistic than this scary version of reality.
Yeah.
But for some reason, some of us are so much more inclined to go this way than this way.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, like, what's your hunch about, like, lawyers, and like, you've worked with like tier 1 special forces people in your background. Like, I know this is a really common thing across the spectrum. So, like, what is it about, like, high expectations, high talent, high drive people that gets them disconnected from reality?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it, I always feel like it's both nature and nurture.
Sure.
So for me, I often feel like there probably is some stuff in family of origin that contributes to the wiring of our brain that leads to us being maybe a little bit more anxious, a little bit more inclined to want to detach from reality, to avoid.
Sure.
So I think that's definitely a contributing factor, is that maybe we weren't set up for success completely from our family of origin, and that sticks with us. You know, that's especially when it's happening in our early childhood. It's like laying it in cement in our brain, and we have to really figure out ways to rewire that as we get older. I think the other factor is personality. I think those personality traits, some of them are just a part of us, like having the desire to want to do things right the first time. I remember I have a 10-year-old son, and when he first started school, I remember him sitting at the table and doing some school project and instantly getting frustrated because he couldn't do it perfectly the first time and crumpling up the paper and throwing it across the room. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is happening? But you know, how to me, that was the perfect example of how this is a part of who he is. I don't think we made him that way.
Sure.
It was just kind of there, but being able, anyways. So, I think that's the other piece. This also the self-efficacy, this belief that you can be successful and can do things. Some people have a greater amount of self-efficacy naturally than others.
True.
So being able to kind of recognize that, I think that's a contributing factor to why someone might be in that those desires.
Does it affect how they relate to their spouses, their partners, their kids? Or is it just a major issue at work?
I mean, I don't know that it could be that isolated and siloed. It bleeds into all areas of our life, and the longer it goes untreated, whether it be our substance use or anxiety or depression, imposter syndrome, whatever, stress. It's inevitable that it's going to bleed into other areas of our life and become worse over time. Without treatment, doing nothing about it is not going to lead to just miraculous, spontaneous change most of the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
Right.
Or not in my life, anyways.
Uh,
So, yeah, I think it does affect their relationships. And that might also be part of the denial system that keeps them sick longer. Is like, well,
Yeah.
I drink after my kid goes to bed, or,
Yeah.
yeah, sure, I'm at work until 9 every night, but that can't have an
Yeah.
impact on my family. They know I love them, and it's like, well, yeah, they do to some degree, and this also does have an impact on others.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about the family of like an upper, like an affluent, well-to-do family. The parent that's a lawyer has a drinking problem, and how terrifying it would be to name it a problem,
Yeah,
because what will the neighborhood think? What will the partners at the firm think? What happens to all these memberships that they prize?
yep.
Like, and I could see that. How do you navigate that with the family?
Absolutely. I think that is a huge barrier to lawyers getting help. I think their fear that other people are going to know that I have a problem that I cannot fix for myself,
Right.
and that I'm going to need extra help around, or I think that's a huge challenge for them to process and work through.
Yeah.
The one benefit of being able to come to LAP is that we're all like, they're all in there together, and they've all kind of lived through that experience of having to kind of say, yeah, it is hard for people to know. And a lot of it too is like, that's your disease of alcoholism keeping you sick.
Yeah.
That ultimately, no, most people that don't have a drinking problem don't care. They don't care. They really don't. They're not thinking about you
Right.
like that extensively
Yep.
most of the time. They're not watching you at the business meeting to see if you're consuming alcohol. And what I always remind people too is, if someone does tend to comment or give you a hard time about not drinking, it's usually probably because they have a drinking problem themselves. You're the mirror. Like, so it's being able to talk about it. I think it helps. When we are able to name it, when we're able to say it, it gives it less power. So when we're able to do that in a safe place, like LAP, like here at New Waters, then we're able to really move through it and get the help that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine how disarming that can potentially be for somebody if they're, holding on so tightly, so rigid about like this belief about their self and not wanting to let this out. But then, like you said, being able to come into a group where it's like, oh, we're all the same. We're all dealing with the same stuff. Which is
And with substance abuse in particular,
yes.
I think a lot of the lawyers, they really feel like they're doing a good job hiding it, but they're really not.
Yeah.
People know.
Yeah.
People know already to some degree. They probably do have an idea, and I try to help them to see, like, wouldn't you much rather people know you as a healthy version of you than a person who's sick, than a person
Right.
who's smelling like alcohol in the elevator at the courthouse,
Mm.
than the person that is sneaking out to get beers at lunch, versus someone like that's going to therapy and getting help. Like, I'd much
Sure.
rather someone know me like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about imposter syndrome is like the only thing worse than feeling like you don't belong is other people seeing that you don't belong, or other people believing that. But all of this is just in our own thinking, right?
Yep.
Just like you're saying, like people don't think like that. Like they're really not, and they would much rather have you whole and healthy and recovered than struggling and slowly burning yourself out as you're
Yep.
trying to juggle all of these problems simultaneously.
And convincing them of that, especially when I'm dealing with an attorney that I believe could really benefit from going to inpatient treatment,
Mm,
that can be a big barrier
right.
where they have a lot of reasons why they should not go. A lot of them are valid. They do have important cases. They do work a lot. They will be missed to some degree if they take the time off to get the care that they need. And I probably send myself, and I have a counterpart, Kathy, that works at the Charlotte office, but I would say I probably send between 10 and 20 attorneys each year to treatment, to
Oh,
inpatient
wow.
treatment. Life goes on.
Yeah.
Life goes on. The
Mm.
firm goes on. And we have options to help you through that, especially a lot of solo practitioners, folks that are in their own firm with no administrative help, really get stuck in that mindset that I cannot take this time off.
Right.
And there are some real challenging situations that would make it difficult. And we will do our very best at LAP to support you, to brainstorm ways that we can support you, to help you to get the help that you need versus staying stuck because you feel like you can't go because you can't financially afford it, because you can't take the time off, because you can't not collect a new business.
Mhm.
For the folks that do take that healthy risk and go get the help they need, I've never seen them look back and say, my life is worse now.
Mm,
Never.
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, especially in this, a thought that just came up while you were talking is the especially like the imposter syndrome piece. Like, I wonder how much like just desensitization maybe helps with that. Like, for example, like, I can't let these people know that I'm not good enough, so I have to overcompensate, blah, 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 blah. And then what if they leaned into, what if I just ask for help, right? Or what if I do actually take time to focus on my mental health or physical health and things like that. So I wonder, seeing those individuals, those attorneys that do recover, do turn their lives around, do you find kind of an over or a portion or overwhelming part of those people like be able to kind of handle that stuff better?
For sure.
Yeah,
I think, my opinion is that asking for help is a skill.
absolutely.
That is a skill that not everybody knows.
Yes.
And especially within the practice of law, and I could imagine in lots of other types of professions, it's not really ingrained in the culture of
Right.
that of practicing law to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a skill that has to be learned. And I think the lawyers that go to treatment, that get help, that participate in support groups, they are learning that. And that doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy.
Sure.
And another benefit of being amongst your peers is there's some accountability there, that somebody else can say, well, did you think about asking for help in that situation? And then you're able to say, oh, no, I really wanted to buckle down and do it myself.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
So you have other people that can reflect back, that maybe remind that
Yeah.
maybe this would be a good time to try, getting back on that horse of asking for help and using healthy
great.
coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's good stuff. We all need a little accountability and support. don't we?
For sure.
Sometimes our family members or our partners see it way before we do. Can they reach out to LAP
Yes.
anonymously or say, like, I have a
Mhm.
friend? And if you've ever had one of those situations, can you tell us about a story about how that worked out?
Yeah, for sure. And family members, spouses, even other attorneys will call us. That whole conversation can be confidential,
Okay.
and I'm able to kind of process with them what's the best avenue to handle it.
Mhm.
So I have several examples where that has happened, but I can think of one in particular where a wife called about her husband that was suffering from alcoholism and really entrenched in it, and really was scaring her.
Wow.
It was a pretty scary situation.
Mm-hmm.
Not for her physical safety, but for his own health.
Sure.
And she was afraid he was going to die.
Yeah.
And she was able to call, and we were able to help stage an intervention for this attorney to go to treatment. And thankfully he did. And we
Wow.
were able to kind of help her through the process of navigating getting into treatment, that in itself can be a really difficult thing to
Absolutely.
navigate. Being
Yeah.
able to know, where do I even go? Who do I
Mhm.
call?
Right.
What about my insurance? Who's going to pay for that? So we are kind of, Kathy and I, the two clinicians at LAP, are kind of the boots on the ground within the treatment industry to give guidance about like, this might be a great place for your significant other based on what you're telling me about him. And we're also able to provide some extra support to the spouse, that what we can do when we're living with someone that's in active addiction, because unfortunately they're not always going to be ready when you want them to,
Right.
probably rarely are
Right.
ready when
Sure.
you'd like them to be ready. So we're
Absolutely.
able to kind of help them process that as well by us providing support, but also providing resources to this significant other. Other lawyers will have reason to call sometimes too when they're concerned about a colleague, and we're also able to provide intervention confidentially and in a safe way. We're able to keep the referral source completely private. We do not report to anyone about who has called
Okay.
about the lawyer that they're worried about. Lawyers get in trouble sometimes too,
Sure.
and people tend to know when that happens. So we're able to kind of say, offer a hand. That's how I would put it.
Yeah.
We can't force anyone to do anything. We're the carrot, not the stick. So we're able to kind of say, hey, we've heard you're having a hard time, whether it be myself or one of our lawyer volunteers that fall under the same confidentiality policy that I do at LAP.
Okay.
They're able to kind of reach out and say, hey, heard you're struggling, and we're here to help if you'd like it. And, they may not always want to take us up on that in that moment, but I will say majority of them do come around at some point.
Wow.
They usually keep that phone number,
That's awesome.
and if down the road when they become a little more ready or have experienced, unfortunately, maybe a little more pain and suffering,
Sure.
then they pick up the phone and call.
But I'm thinking about that family that you help, like the wife that called. I mean, you literally saved a life by setting in motion this intervention, because the way that this person's going, it really ends one way.
Absolutely. Well, and I am very grateful to be a small piece, and I really look at it as a small piece, because the attorney is the one that has to do all the hard
Yeah.
work and heavy lifting. We're just kind of leading the horse to water. I can't make any of them drink, but we can show them the way. We can show them the light. We can show them that there's hope and that it gets better. And it really, really does. It gets better. And it's not, as you guys are well aware, it's not this linear path upwards. There's
Sure.
bumps along the way. And that's another piece of our program, is that there's no time limit. We work with people indefinitely. So even those folks that were at our conference, folks that I've known for 8 years, that have been involved with LAP for 30 years, are still going to experience life and have bumps along the way. And we are always there to support them through it, no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
Because we all need that love and compassion.
We do. We do.
Indeed.
A lot of us are raised to not know that. A lot of us are
Yeah.
raised to think you study hard, you work hard, you pay your bills, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
No excuses.
Right. But there's so much more to
Yeah.
it than that.
Yep. And life becomes so much more fulfilling and joyful when we're able to kind of accept the help and move through the change and give ourselves grace. That's the other
Absolutely.
thing, that with lawyers are so hard on themselves. That's one thing that I notice really across the board. And that, that perfectionism, overachieving, it's so lined up, but so hard on themselves. And ultimately, just give yourself a little grace. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to not be perfect and to not have it all together. And there's no expectation of that. We don't have any expectation of that. And we can help you to learn how to not have that for yourself.
Right.
Which is huge, because that's, I can only imagine that's a miserable way to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the disease,
Right.
right? The disease is to see yourself unrealistically and to overreact to the pain that comes and not deal with the pain to begin with. And at that point, I don't blame people for wanting to intoxicate themselves
Right.
out of that pain because
Absolutely.
it's awful. It's awful. But recovery is seeing yourself realistically and saying this conversation that I've been having with myself for the past 10, 20 years, it doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And I need to find a new way to talk to myself.
Yep. I think we all go through that. Like, that's kind of the human experience to some degree. Like, we
Sure.
all have ways of surviving
Mm-hmm.
that as we get older become probably ineffective. And we can keep trying to force that square peg into the round hole over and over again, or we can reach that point where we choose to do something different because
Mhm.
what we've been doing isn't working for me. It's a
Mhm.
survival mechanism that's not helping me to survive anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe I want more than surviving, I want to thrive. And that's
Right.
it's not going to be this way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Nikki, this has been amazing. We talked about how dark life can be when we let imposter syndrome take us all the way to where it wants us to go. But you've also seen how it can be completely different and full of life and fulfillment. And the LAP is free, professional, and confidential. What a gift it is for our lawyers in North Carolina. So thank you so much for being with us here today to talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy to be involved with New Waters and be a supporter of your growth and success. So thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Nikki.
coming.
Yeah.